Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here with you. A good friend of mine who runs a large retailer used to say to me, Dan, you know, retail is 99% tactics and 1% strategy. And he said, you know, we write our strat plan every year. It's called the business review. In other words, we tend to define our strategy as a sum of the tactics, the things that we have accomplished over the year behind us. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 1%. That is, where we think as retailers, where your most number of points of distribution and what's happening to retailers out there. The name of my presentation, I hope, is suggestive to you because what I want to talk a little bit about is this notion called real-time retail. And it's this notion of moving away from a mindset where marketers and brands develop products that are pushed through channels of distribution on a 52-week calendar where we figure out what price elasticities are, we set the shelf, and with 60 or 70,000 items in our store, we do 4,000 or 5,000 price changes a week. But in general, your products just don't get repriced that often, and it's really not what we would call real time. And the fact is that if you sort of look at the marketplace today and you kind of think about how your world is changing as marketers, the greatest portion of your volumes remains in those stores that are 52-week planned, promotional calendars that are 12 weeks out, 14 weeks out, and they fit very well with the way that companies in large consumer products think today. So I think all of you know, however, that retail, just like every other industry, is subject to change. And even the large-scale retailers that have gotten great adoption over a very long period of time, just as this example here shows, is a company named Netflix, which we've talked about a few times. This is a company that obviously experienced profound shock as the world moved away from DVD to streaming. And the lessons that are sort of inherent in these S-curves, and I think one of the most important lessons, is change always comes from below. It rarely comes from up here. It comes from somebody who has very low adoption, very low consumer engagement, and yet over time, they create their own S-curve. And in fact, we oftentimes are only looking horizontally. We're not looking below for change. And so as you think about the world ahead or the world behind, I've been in retail for 30 years, and I think about what I call the Generation 1 retail. And I remember the first trips that I took to places like Hong Kong and other, and it was all the traditional trade. If you go to Russia and different countries today, you'll see lots of this all over the world. Very fragmented, very local, price was opaque, wholesalers were critical to getting the product on the shelf. It was all about in-store selling. I think we've all seen this in different venues around the world. The time that I met P&G for the first time, about 30 years ago, was when it began to work with what I'll simply call Generation 2 retailing. Carrefour had created this incredible store, one of the inventors of this incredible store called the hypermarket. And of course, that box was being imported into markets like the US and in Latin America, other parts around the world. And yet, if you really looked at this business model, this was the first sort of business model that was really scale-based economics. It was all about making the product highly visible, highly available across a whole variety, a one-stop shop for the consumer. And if you really think about this model, this was one of the very first business models, that is, these large box retailers were the first retailers that really effectively self-distributed. So companies like P&G connected with these companies very effectively. And if you think about the supply chain from a consumer point of view back then, it was a pretty simple supply chain. Some companies like Lego would sell their products directly to you, catalog and other forms of communication, stimulate the consumer, and we'd sell direct. But if you think about a lot of the industries that are really in deep trouble today, the book and media industries, right? The sporting goods industry, I can go category by category and tell you all these companies that are in trouble today. And the commonality was they weren't brands that were selling direct. That's one commonality. And the second commonality is they were going through the retail trade. But the importance of going through the retail trade in Generation 2 is these large-scale based retailers, as you know, exercised enormous control over suppliers and in some cases brands. P&G navigated this so successfully and really built its business in really a way that was probably unmatched by any other consumer goods at the time. The key to this business model is that the consumer came to the store. She picked it, she packed it, and she took it home. All the execution we did from a media point of view to drive demand could happen through traditional media, and of course things like shopper marketing and category management became the norm because we realized that one of the moments of truth was at the shelf in these big box retailers. In the last 5 years, I think what we've all seen, maybe 8 years, is that this business model has given way to what I can only characterize as Generation 3 retailing. So you'll notice along the top that we still have the same players. We still have brands, we still have distribution networks, and we still have retailers. Store-based retailers still control the lion's share of distribution across the world today. But there's 3 or 4 new players that are in the marketplace today. One of them are the marketplaces. We had a great presentation this morning by Alibaba, who really did an extraordinary job of defining for you where exactly they sit in the marketplace. It's so critical as a marketer to understand these marketers don't create demand, they take demand. They are share takers, they don't create. So unless you're in a very high growth category or segment, when volume goes into a marketplace, it's often coming out of another form of retail. In this case, often it's coming out of store-based retailers, such as you can see in every country that you travel to together. A second player that was new in the second generation of retailing is what we simply call the intermediaries. It's all the folks that you heard from today. It's the Snapchats, it's the search engines, it's the social engines. It's all the people that aggregate audiences, and they often can direct an audience. But the difference between an intermediary and a marketplace is an intermediary never takes title of the goods. They rarely sell, they don't transact. Their revenue model is built on sort of a fee for service, where the marketplaces often, as you know, their revenue streams primarily come from the gross merchandise value of the goods they sell. What's changed about this chart is the fundamental economics, that is, of this value chain. The fundamental economics of retailing have been completely reshifted. If you assume for a minute, as you heard this morning, that 10% of retail on average is going through these channels of distribution, that is through marketplaces, and being hugely influenced by these new intermediaries, players that weren't even in the marketplace 15 years ago in a meaningful way. You can clearly see what's happened is that the viewership of the consumer and the sale of retail goods has been really altered away from the store-based retailing model. So for every marketer out here, I'd like to share the following statistic. If we lose 400 or 500 basis points in a typical store, a large share, that is, if we lose that kind of market share, we can go from making lots of money to breaking even. And if we lose another 200 basis points, we're losing money. So on your way home tonight, drive by all the big stores that you might see or in the markets that you're in, and realize that if you lose 8 or 10% market share on a store-by-store basis, you begin to deleverage just like you would in a manufacturing facility. So the implications of these marketplaces and these intermediaries is they're causing all the Generation 2 retailers to really have to rethink the new S-curve. And what's the new S-curve? It's the role that these demand aggregators have on where consumers shop and what they buy, and it's the role of the marketplaces. If you think about the world and sort of where this might go, I think all of you know that companies like Alibaba, companies like Souk, all of the major marketplaces are really in the middle of a very ambitious project. And at the risk of just sort of blinding you, if you really look at the infrastructure that these companies have created in order to entertain, in order to help you connect with the merchandise that you want, in order for you to connect and message with consumers and friends that you have, if you look at the size and scope of these marketplaces today, you can see that they really are on a multi-year journey to build a one-stop destination, a forecast for you. As we move out to the next 10 years, We're going to go from 250 large-scale marketplaces, all of whom are largely share takers in the marketplaces where they compete. We're going to go from 250 of those to around 25. Significant change in the number and the size of these markets. Now, as we look at these marketplaces, there's a lot of lessons that I think all of you have experienced. But the first and most important one is these marketplaces are a real substitute for our stores. They take traffic out, they take shoppers out, they take transactions out, and they don't have to take 20% of the volume. 5%, 10% has a real impact on the typical store. Secondly, we can see that consumers actually enjoy the automation, that is, the messaging, the pricing, the assorting, the personalization is a real benefit to consumers that you don't get necessarily in a store-based retail environment. Thirdly, these retailers run on completely different metrics, and anybody who runs Amazon, for example, can tell you they have these things called the item P&Ls, and item P&Ls are pretty serious item-level profitability, which no other retailer, that is store-based retailer, really uses effectively to understand not just the gross margin that I earn on a product, but what the real profitability is. In a sense, bringing manufacturing cost accounting into the retail environment. It's very difficult economics. As I think everybody here appreciates, there's many verticals that make money in the dot-com world, that is in the e-commerce world. As it's often told to me, you can buy and sell diamonds many times. There's enough margin in there. It's low weight, low cube, high dollar value. You can ship it anywhere and still enjoy a profit margin. That's not true with plaster, as our friends from Home Depot can testify. In other words, very high weight, very high cube, very low dollar density. And if you really look at the economics of digital direct, even though you saw that profit line looked very intentional, I suppose that Jeff Bezos could make the decision to raise prices just slightly and capture some margin, but we'll see what that does from a demand point of view and whether or not it really is that easy. I'll come back to the economics in a minute. I think one of the most important things that's happened to retail as a result of these marketplaces is the marketplaces have actually raised the switching costs. Think about it for yourself. If you went to a local retailer and you were dissatisfied, you leave. And then the next time you go to a different retailer. If you actually look at this ecosystem, if you ask people who shop Tmall, people who shop Alibaba, people who shop Amazon and say, how much would I have to pay you to never shop at Amazon again? There is no number. The switching costs are so high that once a consumer goes into these marketplaces, they tend to stay. And for you to think that we can win in one and not win in another as a brand becomes very complex. So if you think about the marketplaces and what we've learned so far, there's a lot of really important, but maybe one of the most important ones for me is that these marketplaces run on real-time data. We don't go back and say, what were the last 52 weeks? Come on, get my analyst. I got to get my brand analyst. I got to get my monthly report. What did we do this week, last year? Didn't we run that promotion again? We don't run on 52-week data in the marketplace world. We work in real time. We've talked a lot about the Dollar Shave Club, and I know and been in and know the investors and close enough there to tell you that the way they organize around demand is completely different than anything I've heard here today. Completely different. If you look at their commercialization teams, sure, they have demand people, they have creative people, they have, in other words, many different, they have these teams, as you all know, 24/7 that are, sort of running campaigns and driving demand across their business. And that's not the only one. Any of these web-based sort of models are built this way. The most complicated part of this entire model, that is in the consumer direct model, is without question logistics. And if you think about what I mean by that is simply, if you are a retailer who said, boy, I've got to do this consumer direct business model, you'll quickly see that there's 2,000 possible combinations. And if you want to accommodate every different way that a consumer wants to order, the way that we want to fulfill, the way they want to have it delivered, and the way they want to receive it. So what I'll leave here for you is simply that as we look back over sort of the last 100 years, here's what we know for sure. You've seen the impact, and candidly, in most parts of the world, sort of the winding down of traditional retail. You've lived through and were very successful in the world of Generation 2 retailing. We're in the midst, very much in the middle of the midst of Generation 3 retailing. And if I had more than 15 minutes, what I would convince you of is that there's yet another generation that's just an inch away. And it's a business model that's largely run on real-time data with real-time demand creation. And the role of the vendor is completely different. I'm going to take my hands off the wheel. I'm not going to run the category anymore. I'm not going to run your items anymore. I'm going to give you the platform, and you're going to run it. The platform with the scorecards, with the metrics. It's your funding. It's your promotion. It's our supply chain. So if you could jump to my last slide so I conclude, please. Just push end, if you could, please. So as you think about that, what I'd like you to take out of this is the following. Most CPG brands are G2 companies. You're really good at 2 pallets per store. You're really good at it. You're really good at launching new products in that kind of environment. If you think about the competencies that we're going to need as we move forward, I'd just like to highlight a couple of them if I could. One is, as leaders, what I learned working with retailers and brands around the world is job one is vocabulary. Making sure that we're all talking about this in a similar way. That isn't to diffuse ideas, it's just to really get us to talk about it similarly, because it speeds up discussion, it speeds up ideation, and it'll bring us to a conclusion quicker. Secondly, in my world, if you just look at all the tech, and I love that innovation concept that you launched today, it was just perfect. If you look at most of what's happening in the venture world and most of what's happening in the university labs around the world, most of it doesn't matter now. And so the second thing that we have to do as an organization is really pay attention to innovation triage. What's definitely in, what's definitely out, and what are the ones that we want to monitor. Thirdly, content and creative. There's no question that content and creative wins in this world. We've heard lots of good input on that today. Fourth, demand gen. Think about this. If you had to walk in tomorrow as a marketer and your job was to create demand for today, not next week, for today, what would you do tomorrow? And what are the tools and the information that you would need? If you were now on the Walmart team or on the Kroger team, and I put you in that place for me, and there's no more 52-week calendar, you drive demand across our stores today. Lastly, supply chain. I've had the good fortune of working with 2 or 3 groups here at P&G that were supply chain. There is no competency inside companies like P&G that will need to be innovated perhaps more than in logistics. Why? Because I have 2,000 possible combinations in terms of how that consumer may want to order it, how she may want to have it picked, packed, shipped, and where she wants to have that product delivered. So you as P&G will be dealing with tremendous amounts of commonality and complexity as we move forward. Thank you all very much. I hope it was helpful. Voice of the retailer.